Hi, I'm Gabriel Grinstein, and this is my banking application capstone presentation. Part 1, Front-End Architecture, Authentication, and App Diagram. So here's my app diagram. I created a 3-tiered application with a client-side, server-side, and database. For my client-side, I used React Bootstrap for UI design, Apollo Client to communicate with GraphQL, and Firebase Auth to assist with sign-in and mainly for Google sign-in functionality. I use Firebase hosting to get an SSL for my custom domain, mainly so I can use Google sign-in. And on the server side, I use GraphQL for queries and mutations of the user, and Express as for a REST API for JWTs, JSON Web Tokens, and I have a data access layer to communicate with my database, which I chose to use MongoDB Atlas, which is a cloud-hosted database in itself. I use API testing, GraphQL for GraphQL, and Postman for the RESTful API with Express, and I have 2 different hosts for front end and back end. I use Netlify and Heroku, and they build and produce automatically when I push to my repository. For my front end architecture, here's a snippet of my app component. I use React Router. As you can see in the middle routes, every component that you access while logged in, I wrapped in an auth wrapper component to check for authorization and authentication before having access to those pages. And for UI design, I focus on uniformity, so I use props and pass around states of that. Here's an example. Here's my card component. You can see in the background and props title, props text. And then I use that, for example, my deposit component, or many areas I use card, almost every component. But for example, you can see status text and status color. So when the user submits a deposit, if it's successful, it'll be green. If it fails or an error occurs, it'll be red. And I set that through state. You can use state. I have a few ways I use for authentication: Firebase, Auth, GraphQL queries, and JWTs. I'll focus on the very bottom. You can see the query, the GraphQL query. That's an authentication. If it doesn't end up finding the user, it means that no user is present. And on the middle, my JWT authorization, I use the helper function, which is here. And so with the flow, it sends the JWT to the server. If there's no access token, it'll then hit a new endpoint with the get new access token function, and it'll check for a refresh token. If a refresh token exists, it'll generate a new access token. But if neither exists, it'll log the user out, or if there's a 403 error, such as a malformed access token, it'll send a 403 and log the user out. Here's an example, like I said, of the new access token generating from the refresh token. Here's an example of that in play. As a previous recorded video, it'll show getting the access and refresh token. So when a user signs in, it gets those tokens, and it stores in local storage, as you'll see below. And when the user logs out, those tokens get erased. So if the user tries to go back to the URL that contains their user ID, it will not allow the user to access that page. Even if you hit back, it will still not allow the user access. But yeah, thank you.